Generic yet polite salutations to one and all. This is Trent Mayfair, the itinerant LARPer, coming to you from my campsite in Colorado. Now, I had the opportunity to attend a couple of Amtgard events since the last time that we have seen each other, and so I would like to talk about some of my favorite experiences at them, especially over at the one in Colorado. You simple-minded tool. What? Do you honestly think anybody will learn anything about LARPs and running games if you don't also speak of the negatives? Well, I'm sorry, I don't like talking bad about people. What do you expect of me? Well, if you won't do it, I will. Now, as usual, let's discuss some of my initial drive thoughts to each of these LARPs. So, Sio, would you like to take what my thoughts were for Missouri? I know that you shared some of them. No, we will not speak of those experiences ever again. Okay, well, here's some of my initial thoughts regarding Colorado. Um, I do recall as I left Minnesota, I was in a bit of a rush to kind of get through the Dakotas and, Wyoming area. I've been there before. There's really not much for me to see. It's been developed to a point where I'm really not comfortable there anymore. I'm not exactly what you would call a city person. Um, but, so I do recall thinking, if I just keep driving long enough, I can bypass South Dakota and get into Wyoming. Uh, Unfortunately, I didn't quite make it, so, yeah, I ended up sleeping on the roadside. Um, Badlands and Devil's Tower. I was much more impressed with them as a teenager, I gotta admit. Uh, Going down through Wyoming, I do know that one of the foremost thoughts on my mind was, gee, I hope I can find a gas station as I'm watching the needle just move further and further and further down towards empty. Yeah, a lot of fun there. Really makes the heart race. Um, but when I finally did get into Colorado, I went over to Denver because I have a friend or two there that wanted to meet up with me, and I'm more than happy to meet with a couple of friends while I'm on my trip. But I haven't been in Denver in around 25 years, and now it is this huge, thriving metropolis amidst the crossroads of two major interstates. When I got there 25 years ago, there was the airport, the Coors Stadium, then a little bit up the road you had the bank, the hotel, the laundromat, and Victor's Steak Bank Food Real Good. And that was it. And then you were out of Denver. It was just a little two-horse town. Now, oh my goodness, there's a downtown district. The traffic is horrendous. I will say this though, the Rocky Mountain High is rather nice. So that being said, let's discuss a little bit about the actual games. So, when it comes to the administration and the coordination that they exhibit, in Minnesota, the administration arrived 30 minutes late and for the most part ignored us. Well, in Colorado they seem coordinated, but stretched just a little bit thin. In Minnesota, the administration was not helpful in the slightest. They dismissed me on the first meeting. They didn't even seem to talk to the players all that much. Real shame it was. Well, insofar as helpfulness in Colorado, they were a little too busy setting up and running games to really get into minutia with people, but they really did try to help wherever they could, and I will definitely give them props on that. Insofar as their attentiveness, oh, no, no. They just seemed to want to get in, do the job, and get out. They were much more focused on themselves and trying to get everything done at the last minute instead of focusing on the players. Highly, highly unprofessional. Well, insofar as the attentiveness in Colorado, they did try to give players the attention they deserved and seemed to get everyone fairly quickly, but there was a certain degree of rushing that I noticed. With only 4 hours to play, that's kind of understandable, though. I should also point out that because Amtgard runs in so many different chapters, but they do have a standardized rulebook, there is a certain degree of generalization and homogenization in regards to what any given game is going to offer you. Now, moving on to the rulebook discussion. CEO, you can take a seat for this one. Oh, thank you. When it came to the initial read-through reaction, my thoughts were that it was a ponderous rulebook, and the only thing that really made sense on that first read-through was the contact points for the combat system. Beyond that, I couldn't really understand the skills. I couldn't wrap my mind around them too effectively. The advancement system was a little convoluted. Their hierarchy is very detailed in there. Not saying you really seem to need to know unless you're really going to be getting into the game, but yeah, there were some definite issues, and it definitely needed some cleaning up and simplification. Um, how the rulebook is good is that it's so bad that it's spawned any number of spin-off systems, just because people are sitting there going, well, I can do better, and you know what? That's how LARP evolves. So that's actually a good thing. Um, in regards to the diversity of characters for the rulebook, though, everything in the rulebook seems to be geared towards combat. And if you're not willing to do combat, you're going to be missing out on all the skills and other things that you can do with the game. But because of this, there's a certain degree of roleplay diversity. You can go in role-playing as a bard. You can be the person who's buffing people and restoring usage of skills and stuff like that. But you're not singing. You're reciting a couple lines that they dictate in the rulebook. And beyond that, there's no actual roleplay to it. It's really just all about the combat from the multiple games that I have seen. And that, in my opinion, poses the question of, if all people are doing is grabbing weapons and thwapping each other with them, is that really live-action roleplay, or is that just playing around with buffer weapons? Now, in regards to the player base, were they open-minded? Well, in Minnesota, nobody seemed to want to have anything to do with us. In Colorado, people were more open-minded than their counterparts over in Minnesota, but they didn't seem all that welcoming towards a new player who was about the roleplay instead of the combat, with the exception of a couple of key people who were very into it and expressed wanting more roleplay out of their game and how frustrated they were at not getting it. In regards to new player treatment, CO? New player treatment in Minnesota? Are you sure that you want me to cover that? Because quite honestly, we got passed around from one player to another. First one had to sign a waiver, then she passed us off to a player who plays a bard, who basically just wrote down some skill names and handed them to me and expected me to know exactly what everything did, and seemed very put upon that he had to, quote, explain these basics to a newbie LARPer, as he put it. So yes, I was not treated well as a new player at all. Over in Colorado, I watched as an individual took responsibility, just a regular player, he wasn't even a marshal. He took responsibility for training 4 new players. As soon as they walked in and got their characters made and everything, he answered all their questions, he took them through the ins and outs of combat. He actually missed the first game of that event, because he was actually so dedicated to helping these new players. And that's a wonderful sign. It would be nicer to see the administration taking responsibility for that. But the fact that there are players within the base who are willing to do it also speaks mountains. Because when somebody is walking into a game new, you don't want the experience that I had at the other place, where you just get shunted off and stuff like that. Having even just another player come up and say, hey, let me show you how this works. That is a true boon for any game. At the very least, at the Denver, Colorado chapter of Amtgard, new players, you can trust that there's going to be a person there who will teach you what you need to know and you can turn to with other questions. Important thing all around. Now, in regards to the immersion level, um, immersion level? What immersion level? Everybody spent all their time on the field of battle for 4 straight hours, beating the snot out of each other. When Trent offered to sing, people outright said no. When I offered readings, people outright said no. And when Trent was standing off to the side quietly singing to himself, he was asked to stop because, quote, it was distracting to the fighters. Yes, because we all know how horrible music is on the battlefield. It can't help to keep people coordinated or in time or anything like that. Oh yes, it was absolutely distracting people. It's Amtgard. Combat is the focus, not roleplay. However, in Colorado, there were individuals who were not involved in combat, and they did enjoy a few songs and offered some tips on where to look for other resources for running LARPs and things like that. I was very happy to get those suggestions. But by the same token, I have to ask again. If all people are doing is dressing up in a costume, grabbing a weapon, and thwapping each other with no actual storyline, is it actually live-action roleplay, or is it just live-action combat? Question for the ages. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about our overall experience. Because even if you do not have a great experience, there are still things that you can learn. So, in Minnesota, oh, what did we learn from the game in Minnesota? Oh yes, just from observing the game. Be on time, be prepared, and don't make things go non-stop. Having time to sit down and rehydrate your players is an important thing to do. In Colorado, I learned that if you're going to recreate a pop media storyline, make certain that you know it well enough so that the players aren't correcting you, and don't railroad the storyline. If it plays out differently, roll with it. Just roll with it. It's not that difficult. Oh, Tyrion Lannister didn't actually, win this particular battle, but in the series he did. Well, now in your world, he did not win that battle. Don't just turn around and go, well, he won. It doesn't work that way. That's not live-action role-playing. That is an attempt at recreation that is failing. Now, insofar as what I learned from the players, CO, you want to talk about Minnesota again? What did I learn from the players in Minnesota? Apparently the roleplay is not fully necessary. You can just have fun thwacking your friends with boffer weapons. I can't speak for Trent here, but I don't consider that LARP. Insofar as Colorado goes, what I learned from the players is that it really is important to make room for the people who don't want to combat, even if it is a combat-oriented game. I sat there for 4 hours with people who were listening to me sing and expounding on how much more they wanted to see that in their game. It's not just about the combat. Okay, and it's not just about the story, it's about how the players can interact with each other in a meaningful way where they don't have to be themselves. This is what roleplay is all about. Now, insofar as what I learned from the GMs, I can't say anything bad. CO, you take Minnesota again. What I learned from the GMs at the Minnesota game? Nothing. They talked at us for 5 minutes about how nobody but them can run a LARP right. Meanwhile, they were putting together flags for a game, and they basically dismissed us by saying, now get back out there into combat. When I informed them that I was a non-combat player for this event, since I didn't like how hard they were hitting, they basically told me, oh, well then you're useless, and ignored me for the rest of the time that I was there. Well, in Colorado, when I spoke to the GM, who incidentally, very nice guy, actually took some time, he only heard like what I was doing for like maybe about 10 to 15 seconds, but he made sure to make time after the game to actually sit down and talk with me for about 30 minutes or so about how to make an effective LARP and things like that. But the one thing that he was so emphatic about was creating an open and safe space for all genders, sexual orientations, personality types, etc., and nipping any toxic behavior in the bud as soon as it is seen. He so heavily stressed this last point. I'm actually going to be adding a code of conduct page to my rulebook because of how emphatic he was and the stories that he told me about what he had to do to remove the toxic players from his game and turn it into a safe space once again for the players. So, definitely a good thing to think about. You do not want toxicity in your game, and the sooner that you can cut that out, the better. Well, that is going to end my video for today. I do hope that I am going to see you at the next LARP, which I believe is Regzorit, over in Salt Lake City, Utah. I will see you there. Hopefully, I will not be needed again.